Baylor's recent team building success could be because they took a page out of Deion Sanders' book. Let's get locked on Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello there, Bears fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by Game Time and part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and The Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. Appreciate you guys making it your first listen today and every day. And we've got a jam-packed show for you, as we always do. I never say we have like a lightly packed show ahead of us. But if I ever do, it means I'll be honest with you guys. But we do have a lot to go over today. Looking at Baylor's recruiting success, and I mean in high school and in the transfer portal, and why both those avenues have looked eerily similar to what Deion Sanders has done at Colorado. Also, Dave Aranda, while he might be the guy, like we talked about yesterday, he's cleaning out house on on the defensive side of the ball. And he's getting rid of some long-time Aranda compatriots. So that's an interesting one that we're going to have to take a look at. And taking a look at the hardwood, how the Bears will get back on track in the game against Cincinnati Tuesday night. All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Baylor. Obviously, this time of year, after the football games are over, we're really looking hard at mainly roster construction. But high school recruiting, we just had signing day last month. And of course, the transfer portal is the hot button right now. And roster management, I think, would include a coaching staff as well, which we'll talk about in the next segment, but specifically coming in the personnel and the players you're bringing in. Baylor, before they were winning games this year, were getting a ton of momentum through their roster building. And they had a lot of momentum in the summer with some of the high school recruits they got to sign on. They stuck through it even when the season wasn't going as planned at 2-4. You remember Caleb Burns, one of the big linebacker recruits for Baylor, committed to them in the summer. And then Baylor's 2-4, and he's on a plane out to Eugene to see Oregon play Ohio State. It wasn't looking great for some of them. Taz Williams with the pictures of Michigan gear the night before, or a couple nights before National Signing Day. But they kept them all. They had a perfect record for the commitments they got in the summer to the signings that they got in December. And now they're working in the transfer portal big time. It's just a top 10 class of the Big 12, but I would tell you that it's looking even better than that based on what they have in the can right now. And it got me wondering, how did Baylor turn this around? How did Dave Aranda turn this around? Of course, there are big internal reasons why, right? Keenan Hall, Aaron Hunt, a lot of those guys within the walls that have been going out and putting their blood, sweat, and tears out on the recruiting trail, and certainly helping out with the transfer portal as well. But there's got to be some sort of change in strategy. It's not unlike what we saw the midpoint of this season when Baylor wins 6 in a row, and you're like, but what was it? I mean, I was musing on this podcast. What was it? Yeah, it's easy to point Sawyer Robertson and Bryson Washington, but there's got to be something more. And it's the same thing with this roster management. Keenan Hall and Aaron Hunt and all these guys that have been helping out. That's huge. That's a huge part of this. But what changed in their strategy, right? How did Baylor's recruiting strategy take a turn for the better? And I think it's always a good idea to look at best practices, look at who is working out in your conference, in your field. And something that I keep seeing in terms of what Baylor's doing well mirrors what Colorado is doing well, and why Colorado has had a big time rise in the Big 12 this year under Deion Sanders, because that looked like a program that was a mess after year one of Deion, even with Shedeur and Travis Hunter on the team. And he hits the portal pretty hard again, and it works out. I mean, they're in the Big 12 race until the final weekend, just like Baylor was, in a pretty solid year for the Buffs. Not college football playoff, not national championship, but a pretty solid year for the Buffs, which is what Baylor's trying to build on right now, a pretty solid year. And everywhere you look in the rankings and everything and the kind of players they're bringing in, they're mirroring each other. Baylor and Colorado, Dave Aranda and Deion Sanders. Like Deion's offensive line took a big jump this year from what they were last year. I mean, not elite, but much better than they were last year. And he did that through the portal. Baylor, same thing. Gave up the most amount of sacks in the Big 12 last year, took a big step up this year. They addressed that through the portal, big time. And the future of that line is through the portal. And you look at some of the defensive guys that were plug-and-play guys from lower levels that come in right away, right? I mean, we saw that. It was a really impressive thing for Keaton Thomas to come in from the JUCO level and go from, a JUCO tackling machine, which he was certainly that, to coming up to the Big 12 and being an all Big 12 player. Same thing happened at Colorado. Nikai Hill-Green was playing at Charlotte last year. He was playing for Biff Poggi. And now he comes up, makes the step up to Colorado into Big 12 football, and he makes the all Big 12 team. So again, there it is. It mirrors itself again. Or how about looking at this year? Baylor's had so much momentum in the high school recruiting, especially to get a top 5 class in the Big 12 at number 3. Well, you know who else is in the top 5? Deion Sanders, Colorado. Okay, because it certainly looks like, and still looks like, they're going to take a big step down without Shedeur and Travis Hunter, but they've bolstered their roster right now with a heck of a high school recruiting class. And you look at the portal rankings, they're both in the top 10 in the Big 12, and they have the same amount. All right, so Colorado has 1 4-star in the portal and 11 3-stars. Baylor has 11 commitments total. Colorado has 14. Baylor has 1 4-star and 10 3-stars in terms of their portal rankings. They're building their teams the same way. And, obviously Colorado had the Heisman Trophy winner this past year in Travis Hunter. Baylor could have the Heisman Trophy winner this coming year in Sawyer Robertson. Or at least someone who will be in the conversation. And Colorado probably didn't have the running game to really get over that hump and get to the Big 12 championship, but they had a really good quarterback, an awesome receiving core. Baylor has a really good quarterback and what's shaping out to be an awesome receiving core. That still needs another guy or two, but that's what Colorado did last year. They went and got it in the portal. So it might seem simple, but you look at, with all the hype that Colorado gets through their high school recruiting and through the transfer portal, Baylor's doing that too. Baylor's doing that same thing. They're getting those same kinds of prospects. And I'll even play this out. You talk about the 4-star, 5-star quarterback that Colorado gets out of high school. Baylor essentially did that through the portal with Walker White. So, okay, you take the 4-star out of out of your transfer portal commitments, but you're essentially, again, getting the same thing. Dave Aranda clearly looked towards Deion Sanders and what they're doing at Colorado to build his team, and it's worked to similar results this year, this in 2024, and certainly hopes to keep building off it in 2025. But Baylor's got some serious momentum because it looks like they're taking a lot of what Colorado did. And I mean, so far, so good. So long may it continue. Let me know what you think down in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube, or you can find us wherever you find your podcast. Like the video, be sure to subscribe. We roll on with Locked On Baylor and what Dave Aranda, not what he's adding, but what he's subtracting. We'll tell you who is not coming back for 2025. That's coming up next on Locked On Baylor. But first, today's episode of Locked On Baylor is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time, the only place I go to buy tickets. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff games is an incredible experience. Brings fans together like never before. And you see it in Miami, brother. Those semifinal tickets, they're not that expensive. I remember the excitement of those past playoff games and all that we hype it up to be. I would love to be at one of those. This is your chance with Game Time. It's got a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. Filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I did use Game Time to get into Wrigley Field to see some awesome college hockey games. I bought the tickets that day, found a great price, got them a couple hours before the game. They were in my hands an hour before the game. It was perfect. No notes. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. So Dave Aranda has done a lot to add to this program throughout the last, year or so, but it hasn't come without some difficult decisions, right? We've been through his track record. He's hired and fired a couple of coordinators. He had to replace his offensive coordinator this year, essentially replace his defensive coordinator this year by saying, nope, I got it. I'll call the plays. And as good as the offense was throughout the year, Dave's defense was not that impressive. He had some all Big 12 players like the aforementioned Keaton Thomas and Matt Jones. I thought he had some good workman-like guys in the interior of the defensive line, Trevor Ma'ai, Linus Noel. But there left a lot to be desired on the defensive side of the ball, specifically in the secondary. And so Dave Aranda this week on Monday had to make some, I'm sure, tough decisions. And it certainly looks like he is cleaning house on the defensive side of the ball. He retains Matt Powledge, at least at the time of recording of this, the defensive coordinator, but Caleb Collins, the outside linebackers coach, and Kevin Curtis, the cornerbacks coach, both let go by Dave Aranda on Monday. And it's not a huge surprise, even if you are a casual football fan and you want to look at the positions that they did not excel in defensively. Outside linebacker would be one. Middle linebacker, they certainly did with those two all Big 12 guys, and yet didn't have a ton of speed at outside linebacker. And if you just watch the Texas Bowl, you could have identified probably their biggest problem, which was the secondary and their coverage, and specifically the cornerbacks. Because the guy you thought was going to be your best cornerback this year in Caden Jenkins, LSU saw that as a weakness and exploited it a couple of times. And it wasn't just Caden, it was all over that secondary. But this was a team that was not good against the pass all year. 11th in the Big 12 defending the pass. I think it was 230 yards a game they gave up. 304 against Nussmeier in the Texas Bowl. Like that's been a big soft spot for them. Like in any way you look at that, it was a soft defense and it was an easy place to attack. And I did the video on it last week. Like they need to go and get a couple of corners out of the portal. And that's a position, and Dave Aranda said it too, that's a position we really need to improve. In that post-game press conference, he talked about how all these other question marks around the team in terms of positional units turned into check marks, right? We're talking about, wide receiver and running back, kind of figuring out what that was. Offensive line, interior defensive line, they all became check marks. Quarterback, big check mark. The ones that didn't were secondary, corner, and what he didn't say that I will say is the pass rush. Pass rush hasn't been good in years. I mean, we're going on 3 years now that it has not been very effective. And Caleb Collins certainly would have had the hand in that in terms of outside linebackers when Aranda would throw out a 3-4. And Kevin Curtis obviously had a big hand to do with the cornerbacks as the cornerbacks coach. What's interesting to me about these two guys is they have both been with Dave Aranda from the beginning of the Baylor tenure. In fact, Caleb Collins goes all the way back to 2018 at LSU. Like these guys have been around a long time, and they've been around through a couple of different defensive coordinators. Ron Roberts and now Matt Powledge and essentially Dave Aranda. While there's been movement all around the coaching staff on both sides of the ball, all three phases, if you will, these guys have been there. They've stayed. And it's it's kind of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you can think of this positively as, they're not resting on their laurels just because they had a 6-game winning streak and they went 8-4 when no one expected them to. They're not just saying, oh, let's run it all back, because there's a lot of good that's being run back in this team. And what they're doing is taking some of the not as good positionally and trying to fix that, trying to correct that, knowing how close they were to being potentially a great team this past year, and trying not to make that mistake for 2025. So that's a positive way to look at it from a Baylor fan's perspective. But the other thing to look at is, at this time last year, Dave kept his job and he fired Jeff Grimes. And I was certainly one of the people saying this on this podcast, and I know there was plenty around Baylor media and fans in general saying, when is it going to be Dave Aranda's fault? Because that was the second offensive coordinator he had fired in 4 years, and the third one he'd hired in Jake Spavital. And he's fired fired a defensive coordinator, demoted a defensive coordinator, and he's the play caller now, and it's still not very good. And I'm not saying this winter, hey, fire Dave Aranda, but it seems to me like there's an accountability thing here. And certainly Dave has turned the whole team around, and so that's why he doesn't get fired this year, obviously. I'm not one who's going to say they needed to do that. But this next year, almost sets up for 2025 to be like you have to do something big. And I think we certainly expect that, hope for that with the team that they're bringing back and the momentum that they have. But you've shook out all of the perceived dead weight from 2023 at this point, right? Anything that was a weakness last year, you fired. Offense, Jeff Grimes. You essentially demote Sean Bell. He leaves. You find a new offensive line coach. There's a couple of moves there, and all of those things get better. The things that don't get any better are outside linebackers and cornerbacks, and you get rid of those coaches too. So now it's like, if you're in Mac Rhodes' office, you got to be like, Dave, we're giving you a lot of money. We're giving your assistants a lot of money. We're giving your program a lot of money. We've gone out and gotten the type of player that you want. And now it's like, you got to do something for me. And it's got to be big. It's got to be like Big 12 championship kind of expectations. I think internally is what that's going to be. Because look, you've got the quarterback. You've got the coordinator. You don't have to worry about anything on the offensive side of the ball. You want to be the play caller? Go ahead. You want to bring in some new positional guys? Go ahead. And so far, it's been pretty good. I mean, Spavital, big time check. Jamar Chaney has been big in recruiting as well. His name's been dropped a couple of times. Mason Miller, coming from the Mike Leach tree, turned that offensive line around, even though we didn't watch any film on last year's offensive line, which worked like a charm. But now it's like, you've got all this. You've got to prove something to me. And you proved a little something this year. Absolutely. That's why you're staying on here. And that's why there's momentum around this program. But I think the expectation within those walls towards Dave Aranda and from Dave Aranda, if we're being fair, are, this isn't done. This isn't the best we can do. 8-5 is not the best we can do. It was fun this year, and it was certainly a much needed improvement. But these signs to me show that, hey, we'll give you the perfect environment, man. Bring in any coaches you want, all the players you want. You don't have to do any media, no responsibilities for that. You don't even have to have a spring game. We'll eliminate that for you. But let's go figure this out. Let's get to that next level. And it's worth noting, when Caleb Collins put out his farewell, which he did seem very appreciative, genuine appreciation of Dave and Baylor in the Baylor community. Cameron Morgan, one of Baylor's blue chip recruits, 4-star edge rusher from South Oak Cliff, quote tweeted it with just a sad emoji. And I'm like, okay, as long as you hold on to all these guys. Positional coaches, not usually as big a change as if it were a coordinator or a head coach that's leaving, but let's just make sure we keep all these guys. And that also goes to show you how much Caleb Collins had to do with the pass rush. If like a real 5 technique edge rusher, 4-star guy from high school is like, bummed. That needs to improve as well. But Dave, just keep bringing in your guys. The fact that it worked this year, you're not going to get as much heat for it, which is perfectly reasonable. But it's probably, I think, with these moves, showing that it's time to take that next step. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you're watching on YouTube, it's also available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to like the video if you like it, and then subscribe because we want everyone that's watching to subscribe and to like the video because that helps me out a lot, helps the channel out a lot. Locked on Baylor rolls on. We're going to talk men's basketball with Cincinnati coming up tonight, Tuesday, and how the Bears can get right back on track. That's coming up next on Locked on Baylor. But first, guys, you want to get in on this action, right? It's one of the great times of the year. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $250 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets. I said it right that time. Win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Men's basketball takes the hardwood again tonight at Foster Pavilion, taking on a Cincinnati Bearcats team that is looking to prove people wrong, specifically Pete Souza wrong. We had Pete on yesterday in the bonus edition, which we'll be doing on Locked on Baylor as long as I could possibly do it. Like your typical 3-segment show in the morning, like you have here, dropping in the morning, and then a 2-segment one in the late afternoon, early evening, kind of like the old days of 100 years ago, like the morning edition of the paper and the evening edition of the newspaper. I'm a print guy when it comes down to it. But we talked with Pete about this Cincinnati game, so definitely check that out if you want to learn some more in depth about Cincinnati a little bit. But we're also going to look at it from the Baylor side of things because Pete was saying, like, the Cincinnati team in the rankings, and I asked Pete if they were a dark horse for the Big 12, and he said no, they're not. They can do some nice things, but there are levels in this conference, and they're not at that level. Because realistically, year in, year out in the Big 12, there's like 3 teams that are at the top. Last year it was Houston, Kansas, and Baylor coming into the season. It obviously kind of waxed and waned, and Houston ended up winning it. Iowa State got in that discussion, finishing second in the regular season. And now you look at this year, and to me, it's Iowa State, Kansas, and Houston. And there are also some teams that can challenge. We saw Tech really challenge last year, get up to the 4 seed. I think Baylor's still in that challenge realm right now. And then there are teams that are tough as hell to play against, nailed on tournament teams, but just aren't at that level. I think West Virginia is going to fall into that this year. Congrats to them on getting into the top 25. I think Cincinnati will fall into that as well. I think Arizona is probably going to fall into that the way they're playing right now, although Caleb Love is still a terrific player. But that's where these teams are falling. And I do think Cincinnati is probably in that tier. So for Baylor tonight, Pete said it's time to take care of business. I can't agree more. Like, you're playing at home. You've got a team that I guess in theory will be ranked ahead of you, but one that you fancy your talent against. And you got embarrassed against Iowa State. It's time to prove that you can be at that championship level, which I think if it all comes together, they can be, but I thought it would have been more together by now. So for me, it comes down to getting VJ Edgecombe the right shots. It comes down to getting Jaden Nunn's confidence back. Norchad O'Meara taking the right shots, and I mean those ones that are worth 2 points, not 3. I think there are some simple things for Baylor to fix and some things that they have already needed to address this year, like the ball movement and the assists. They had to address that the first week of the season. They certainly turned that around at some point, and they showed it against, St. John's, and it hasn't really come to fruition still as we talk in, the second week in January. So it comes down to me for Baylor in terms of a short term and a long term of getting back into this schedule, figuring out what's your defense. And if it's a zone defense, it's a zone defense. So be it. But also getting these roles established offensively. Norchad, you're our paint guy. Roach, you're our point guard. Rob, you're our second point guard. VJ, you are our cutter, our slasher, our potentially matchup nightmare, a guy who can play inside and out, but more probably inside than out. And Jaden Nunn, you are our three-point shooter when you're out there, because Jalen Celestine and Langston Love listed as day-to-day. We've seen that before. Langston Love was day-to-day last year. LJ Cryer was day-to-day a few years ago. It doesn't mean anything about when they're coming back. So that 7-man rotation you saw in Ames on Saturday, that's essentially your team. I think Baylor's going to win this game tonight. I don't think it's going to be very comfy, but I see them winning this one low scoring, because that's the way Cincinnati likes to play, and I think Baylor can win a game like that. So if I had to guess, I'm going to go 70-62. The Bears take this one in Foster Pavilion tonight, and we'll have the full reaction from that. Thank you guys so much for making it your first listen today and every day. Be sure to like and subscribe. Again, so many of you watching every day are not subscribed. It helps out the channel a lot. We're on the march to 4,000 subscribers. That means a lot to me. It's part of my New Year's resolutions, and you don't want me to miss out on my New Year's resolutions, right? I also want to get 100 likes on the video as much as possible. So get that going. Get there and like the video. It's ambitious, but so are we. Anyway, thanks again for making it your first listen today and every day. I really, really appreciate you guys. And we'll see you tomorrow on Locked On Baylor.